Welcome, everyone, to the gathering at the Cosmic Fire Summit, where we have invited shamanic, earth based healers, teachers, thought leaders, and allies to light our way into the future. During these times of great transformation and change, it's important that each one of us finds our own courageous solutions for the problems of today's world. The gathering at the Cosmic Fire Summit is brought to you by Shaman's Directory, an online global platform for shamanic earth-based services. At Shaman's Directory, we believe that it's time to bring shamanic earth-based wisdom and medicine to the forefront of people's minds when considering their overall health and well-being and the future of our planet. I'm Tricia Bennett. I'm one of the hosts at the Cosmic Fire, and I am delighted to welcome Christina Allen. Welcome, Christina.
Thank you, Tricia. It's my honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's our honor to have you. So for those of you who don't know Christina, I'm going to take a minute to let you know a little bit more about her. So Christina is a modern day medicine woman, spiritual teacher, and writer. She blends a strong research background in physics and neuroscience with decades of practiced indigenous healing arts to help people heal from trauma. She has studied deeply with many renowned spiritual teachers and blends all of this wisdom to create powerful healing spaces where people can dismember their dysfunction and remember who they are, body, mind, and soul. In addition to her active healing practice, Christina shares her wisdom through teaching and writing about the Andean healing arts. Her classes are based on the traditional practices brought through by Juan and Yvonne Nunez del Prado. This path is at the heart of what Christina shares. In that vein, Christina also co-teaches several more advanced Andean-based classes with author Joan Parisi Wilcox. For the highly perceptive and energy sensitive, she teaches a weekend superceptor course, and she has also designed an energy medicine certification program for people who feel called to develop a healing practice. And at these times where we are waking up the sleeping healers, that is a perfect offering. So the topic for our conversation is healing trauma, body, mind, and soul. So again, it is our honor to have you here with us today, Christina. And I was wondering if we could begin by having you tell us a little bit about your path to where you are today. Have you always been on it, or did you have another life prior to where you're sitting today?
I have always been on it, I'm pretty sure. In hindsight, I've always been on it. Since I was a little girl, I grew up in Alaska, lots of wilderness up there. Used to pretend I was a healer in the backyard and, grind up cranberries and moss and, make stuff and fix all the little birds that my cat mutilated and all that kind of stuff. So there's a if I look back, I can see that I was kind of trying to do all that from an early age. And then my parents split up and I moved to California in the late 70s. Moved to Northern California where the psychedelic movement was huge, near San Francisco and Sacramento, and was just immersed in all of that. And that informed me also. Went to a lot of Grateful Dead concerts, and in that process sort of woke up to this idea of the shamanic arts. And I read the Carlos Castaneda books, couldn't get enough of them. I read parapsychology books. My friends were all playing Frisbee and I was like reading these books. And I know that I was being informed all this, I was kind of gravitating towards what I was interested in. But then you get the reality of you're out of high school and like the real world doesn't have any kind of openings for shamans, at least not in 1979. And so, I was programmed, if you will, to go to college. So I did that. And I just bumbled around there for a while trying to figure out, like, how do I put this into one of these boxes? Like, they like this major, this major, this major. I tried psychology, and it was a experimental. I went to UC San Diego at the beginning, and it was an experimental program for psychology. So lots of experiments on animals, like no. But I had these really profound feelings of connecting to the earth, and finally went back and said, okay, I guess, maybe being a geologist might be the way to go. And it took the prereqs for geology, which was physics. And I'm like, oh, this is like sort of like the modern version of shamanism. And so I found a way to sort of become a shaman by becoming a physicist in a sense. Um, and then I realized, like, oh, I don't really fit in this world at all. I'm I'm not super technical. I mean, I can think that way and I can solve problems, but I don't want to sit in a cement room with oscilloscopes all day. And so went to neuroscience because I figured, well, consciousness is that thing that's between matter and energy. You need to understand, at the face of if, because what I was looking at is what is reality. So consciousness seems to be a part of it. Neuroscience seemed a way to go. I went to graduate school in neuroscience. Again, it was very reductive, very materialistic. A neuron, or a set of neurons is creating this. And I was wanting to understand consciousness, and didn't find it. And so I was sort of struggling with the constraints of Western education to take my gifts into the world, and not really feeling how to do it. And I was like 5 years into my PhD program when my mom died. And I was like watching her body die, but her consciousness be still very there, and realized I'm not going to get this in school. I'm not going to get this in the Western paradigm. I'm going to have to step off the bus here and study it with spiritual traditions, which is its own, bag of worms, if you will, because there's not a lot of checks and balances in the spiritual world, where there is overly checked and balanced in the scientific world. In the spiritual world, you can say anything you want to because spirit told you that. And so there's like this craziness of making that shift from a place of certainty to a place of sort of a free for all of information, and sort of trying to navigate through that world and really find where we're going. What we're doing with shamanic work right now is finding our truth in this time of chaos, like honing that inner truth so that you can navigate the total chaos that this world really has become. So I ended up studying with Alberto Vialdo in 2003, and stayed with him for a long time, taught with him, took people to Peru with him, and then started my own school here in Austin, Texas. And then I studied with Joan Parisi Wilcox, who introduced me to her teachers, Juan and Yvonne Nunez del Prado. And I love their work. Alberto's work was a place to step off. What I really take from Alberto's work is that place of holding the healing space, of learning how to get somebody out of their regular mind, of the mind that's carrying the story, the narrative, that all the dysfunction, to an open space where you can sort of reset that. And then what I got when I went into the traditional work was, we actually can use energy to tune people, to entrain them to different healing states, and to reset them and to reorder them, and all kinds of, and it's a pathway of developing your consciousness. So that's been my journey. This interesting thing in terms of shamanic traditions, there's usually an initiation of some sort.
Yeah.
And I think in the old days, it was things like being hit by lightning or things like that. But nowadays, it seems to be trauma, which is interesting because that's what we're going to talk about. But
Yeah.
trauma is often the initiation now that changes the brain. And in terms of changing the brain, part of what I think makes a good shaman is that their brains changes from just the garden variety human brain to a brain that might have hypervigilance. And a brain that has hypervigilance then becomes more perceptive, more aware, starts to be able to see beyond just the normal box that most people are running around in.
Tell us a little bit more about how a changed brain, a brain that's changed from trauma, is more open, and maybe what the difference is between treatment and healing.
Sure. Big topics. from the neuroscience perspective, what happens when you're facing an event that's scary, that's bigger than you, is you go into a stress response, and the stress response, the first impulse would be to fight. If it's too big to fight, then we're going to run. If we can't run and we can't fight, if it's that big or we're that trapped, we're going to freeze. And if you can run or if you can fight, you probably won't be as traumatized as if you freeze. And all of these are, your whole nervous system is designed to do this temporarily in a situation so that you can survive it. Freeze is about surviving, just surviving. We don't care what happens to your body as long as you survive it. You're going into a state of paralysis. You're going into a state of paralysis, but you're going to survive. So a person who runs, hallelujah, they got out of there. A person who fights, they are able to do something. They have some agency. But a person that freezes loses their agency. And the only thing that their agency allows them to do is dissociate and go outside their body. And so they tend to sort of be outside their body when the event happens and watch from the outside. And in watching from the outside, they're dissociated. Then it becomes a dangerous place to come back into the body. There starts to be this relationship with the body that's somewhat dysfunctional. The body does go through the trauma. The body does remember the trauma, but the person might consciously decide, you know what? We're just going to move on. That was absolutely horrendous. We're not going to even remember that. We're going to keep going. But their body is remembering what happened. Your cells, your myofascia, your soul, if you will, everything besides just your intellect is remembering what happened. And maybe you have remembered it, and maybe you create a story about it, and then you create a story about who you are and who you aren't. But the problem with freeze is once it happens once or twice, your brain resets and says, oh, I see. We're going to have to be facing these sorts of things all the time. We better have a protocol. We better have an immediate go-to. And it doesn't choose the immediate go-to of fight or flight. It chooses the immediate go-to of freeze. And so what it will do is you start to have a situation that triggers your stress response, and you go into paralysis. And, if you want to talk about the neuroscience of it, your amygdala, which is a part of your temporal lobe that's sort of in the front of your temporal lobe, anticipates danger. It's designed to anticipate danger, not to perceive it, but to anticipate it. So if it gets trigger happy, it starts running, and then it sets off the free, it talks to the hippocampus talks to the hypothalamus, pituitary, shoots off the adrenaline, the whole system goes into, shunting all the energy towards fight, flight, or freeze. So what happens if you get a trigger happy amygdala, because, your body has decided it's going to go into freeze all the time, or there's a lot of danger, as you start having sort of the downstream effects of trauma. You can't get out of these situations. You can't stand up for yourself. You can't champion yourself. You can't set good boundaries. And then you have more things happen to you and more things happen to you. And you become somewhat of a victim. And then you start to have this really low self-esteem. And then there starts to be just all this downstream stuff that happens also as a result of freeze. So, okay, so the other part of it was talking about treatment versus healing. So you've got this problem with freeze. What do you do about that? In the traditional psychological and psychiatric models of trauma, they treat your symptoms. And not that that's a bad thing. If you're circling the drain, I think it's a good thing to take some medicine and to stay on this side of it. But in the long run, the medicines will stop working. So what will happen is, you go into panic. Well, let's give you some antidepressants so that you stop going into panic all the time. Okay, great. But I've gone on antidepressants and I've taken my whole bandwidth of perception and I've narrowed it down into this little tiny box. So two things I forgot. Another thing I wanted to say about freeze is once you go into freeze and your brain rewires for okay, we're going to have to go into paralysis every so often. It also starts to rewire itself for hypervigilance. So it's anticipating anything could happen, anything's a danger. It becomes very hyper aware. Your brain reprograms itself to become hyper aware, and it reprograms itself to go into instant freeze. So now you're reprogrammed. So in a sense, this is your initiation. Now you're super aware, except you're really dysfunctional because things are going to happen, all the downstream things we talked about. But this becomes a gift you can hone. This becomes part of your shamanic possibility. This becomes that little bit of coal that can become a diamond if you can work it. So back to treating versus healing. Treating tends to turn off the sense of depression about the self-esteem stuff. It turns off the anxiety, but it doesn't resolve that part inside that's wounded, because whoever went through that didn't have the opportunity to process. They went into freeze. So they're frozen. Not only is their body frozen, but they're frozen in time. They're frozen as a 5-year-old. They're frozen as a 6-year-old, as a 10-year-old, a 15-year-old. You can be older, but a lot of these things happen in childhood. Freeze indicates something way bigger than yourself, something that you can't face. You can't face it when an adult is going to hurt you or abuse you in some way. You don't have any place to go with that. When you're the same size as them, you can fight or run. But when you're a little person, you don't have any place to go with it. So there's a little person stuck in there, frozen in those emotions, frozen at that time, and their body is still carrying the trauma. So another thing that we want to talk about is, in terms of freeze, if you were a gazelle in the Serengeti or wherever gazelles are, and you're being chased by a lion, once you get free, you're going to shake out all that adrenaline from the fear of being chased by the lion. But humans don't do that. Humans have some strange kind of thing where they shut themselves down and internalize it and just press it into their body. So the memory gets frozen in there too. So their whole body becomes a memory bank for the trauma, and they never get that chance to shake it out. So there's this visceral part, this very body part, there's the brain part, there's the mind part. The mind starts thinking of the world in a certain way because, oh, it's dangerous now. These are the things I'm going to have to do. This is who I am. The ego starts to restructure itself, and the ego can create personas. It can create parts of itself that are going to anticipate freezes coming, and it doesn't want freeze to come. So it's going to go out and people please and fawn and do all these preventative things so it doesn't have to go into freeze. And so you've got this whole huge dysfunction, and giving someone SSRIs doesn't fix any of that. It just makes them not go into panic. It just makes them not, maybe they don't sink into the hole of depression. But you can unpack some of that in therapy. And you can modify your behavior, but you still have a 5-year-old in there that hasn't processed her wounding, or his. You still have that 5-year-old whose body is still locked. The myofascial, structure, connective tissue of your body is still holding the memory and hasn't released it. And there's even research being done that memory is actually stored in the membranes of cells, the way the proteins are organized in cells. So the cells are still remembering this. It's not all that treating is doing is it's allowing you to adapt to the fact that you're wounded and that you're damaged, so you can live that way. It's not healing, which is actually going into that space and saying, let's let that little 5-year-old actually come to the surface, do what she needs to do to be processed, to move through her trauma. And what she often needs, or he, is to go to mommy and to be held. If we're in a really traumatic situation, what is our first go-to if we have a normal mom? And that's sort of the problem with a lot of this, is we don't always have a normal mom to go to, or she's not there, or she's ignoring the situation. But we go to her and she wraps her arms around us and she entrains our nervous system to hers. And we're like, oh, okay. But if that little kid never got that opportunity to reframe, redirect, re-entrain their nervous system, they're locked in this freeze kind of state. So part of healing is going in and holding that child, not necessarily holding them physically, but holding them in a space, a healing space where they can come through and reset their nervous system, look at the dysfunction they've created, reset their dysfunction, reset their personality, reset their, release all the trauma, all the shaking that their body needs to do. All of that is in the context of healing. Meds don't really do that. Understanding yourself doesn't really do that. Understanding your dysfunction doesn't really do that. Understanding doesn't heal. I think it's one of the things that's a shortcoming of our mental health process is we think if we analyze it, if we understand it, then we're good to go. But all that's really doing is keeping us in our narrative and restructuring our narrative so we can adapt to okay, this is who I am, this is what's happened to me, how can I live in it? Instead of saying, let's break down that whole structure of who you are and what your story is and create a new one. And I think that's this is where the shamanic work starts to have more influence. Is shamanic work isn't about analysis. It's not an intellectual process. It's about opening up a space for someone to step out of their narrative, step out of their personality, step out of who they are, so they can really reframe it, fix it, change it, all that kind of stuff.
Let's dive into the shamanic work and talk a little bit about that, and how shamanic work is relevant to addressing trauma.
So first we have to preface this by saying there's so many different forms of shamanic work. But one of the things that I think is sort of a theme to shamanic work is working at the level of the soul, working at this place of beyond just the conscious mind. So we have to define the soul to some degree. And I would say the soul is the full level of our consciousness. If we come back to psychological terms, we would say it's the ego and the unconscious and the subconscious. It's the whole ball of wax. Spiritual terms, we would say it's the part of us that's energetic, that carries all that information, all the story of who we are. Neurologically, we would talk about the default mode network. It's this part of these nuclei in the brain that in the idle brain just kind of keep everything like, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, this is my identity. And if you see what the, where these nuclei connect to different parts of the brain, what they stimulate, they're stimulating self-awareness, narrative, internal narrative, identity, that kind of stuff. So all of that just awareness piece is just a subset of the soul consciousness, which has the unconscious aspect to it. So psychology talks about this. It says there's an unconscious aspect. But what shamanic work does is it says, yeah, that's where all the information is. That's where we've got to go. Somehow we've got to break into this. If I just keep working with you and you tell me about your story, you're staying in the ego, you're staying in the default mode network, you're staying only in the conscious mind, the mind that in fear has created this narrative and created this safe box and doesn't want to go outside of it because this is who I am, even if it's dysfunctional. So what the shamanic work does, it can work with trance work. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can break down that default mode network, but breath will break it down, drumming will break it down, dancing will break it down, psychedelics will break it down. There's lots and lots of different ways to break that down, to open the person up out beyond their ego, their conscious mind, their default mode network. And that's where you can start to remember the parts of you that you've forgotten, because you've shut down a whole bunch of yourself to survive this thing. So what I see as the shamanic contribution to healing is this contribution of working at the soul level, at the whole level, of saying, let's remember who you are. Let's bring back the parts that left, and let's, reformat, if you will, your soul. Your soul's got this sort of structure. If you want to talk about it being this energetic field, it's carrying this structure, or these imprints that are downloading into you. And it's these are the unresolved aspects of that. So what if we hold this bigger space than the space of your consciousness, but the space of your unconscious and conscious mind? If we just hold this whole space open, you actually know what you need to do to heal. One of the things that's beautiful about the Andean tradition is there's this sense of an Inca seed, which is down here underneath your heart, underneath your sternum, which is your spirit, if you will. It's your divine self. It knows who you are no matter what. So this is another important part of shamanic healing, is the ego doesn't want to break itself down to heal. Thank you very much. Because the ego is keeping the person safe. But if you go into a spiritual tradition that understands there's a part of you that exists beyond the ego, then you are then there's a safe place to return to and to heal from internally, that the shaman can hold space for you. Now, like I said, there's lots of different shamanic techniques and shamanic approaches. But in terms of the kind that I do, and some people would argue it's not shamanism, it's, I don't care at this point. It's healing at a level that's not, it's not analytical and intellectual. It's healing at the soul level. You're getting that person to actually tap into who they know themselves to be at the divine level, and recreating themselves, bringing themselves back into alignment, which means bringing that little 5-year-old through and letting her heal and all these various other things.
One of the things that you mentioned was really focusing your practice around the Andean tradition. And I think that the world today is so fractured. I mean, I think we're all traumatized every day.
Yeah.
So having a practice where we can remember to call ourselves back is really a vital practice to have. So tell us a little more about how Andean energy work helps with trauma, and then I'd love to hear about the shaman's death and how that applies to trauma.
Okay, so two things with the Andean work that are they're intrinsic to healing. One is, so this idea of going into freeze is a disconnect with the mother, in a sense. So part of healing is reconnecting with Pachamama, reconnecting with the mother, reconnecting with the earth energy. So one of the things that we would say in this tradition is somebody who needs healing needs to reconnect with Pachamama, with the earth energy, because they're sort of outside their body. They're no longer connected to the earth. But the second thing that's fascinating to me about this tradition is you learn how to tune energy. And so one of the frequencies that you tune energy to is called Munai, and Munai is love. And this comes back to entraining to your mother. It comes back to going back to your mother's arms. When you can run Munai through somebody, through a Saman Shakwi, through an energy bath, in a sense, just flow it through somebody, you tune them back to love. And tuning them back to love is very much what the mother was doing when she took the child back into her arms and said, I've got you, you're okay, you're safe. And then there are even higher frequencies of Munai called Hampe Munai, which can just kind of sort of restructure the energetic dysfunction. So one of the things I like to do with this, even though it's not part of the Karo tradition or some of it's just me taking it to where I want to go with it. Because once you learn the principles, you can take it anywhere you want to. When I run Hampe Munai through a nervous system that's frazzled and frayed and frozen, it melts. all the tremors start to come out, all the trauma starts to come out, all the emotion starts to come out, all the stuff that's frozen thaws and is able to surface. So it's really a beautiful way of energetically releasing that stuff. And if you want to talk about it in terms of physics, if you have a cement block, let's say, you can get that cement to liquefy if you vibrate it at the frequency that the molecules are holding the cement together, right? So you can, if you can vibrate it at a sound frequency that is at the frequency that the molecule structures are holding it together, they will stop being able to, they will become part of a, they will start to liquefy and let the cement pieces just become water again. So in a sense, what you're doing is you're bringing that person out of fear and reminding them of what they're made out of, which is love and Sami, high energy Sami, and letting them restructure their cement into a new form, which takes us to shamanic death on some level. But we can wait. I can wait to, and go there and
No,
see.
I just love that. It's so beautiful that you're a physicist and a shaman at the same time because you have explanations for all of these things that are really grounded in the real world.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. And neuroscience too, like how the brain works. Yeah.
it's so important. So thank you for that beautiful analogy of the cement. That was perfect. Thank you. And on with the shamanic death.
Okay. So shamanic death is sort of a common theme in shamanic traditions. When somebody is at a certain, when they reach a certain level of whoever it is that they are, and that person can't go on anymore as that person, um, either they're going to be initiated into a higher order, or they've just hit rock bottom and they cannot, they just cannot exist anymore as who they are. Whoever they are has to die. The body doesn't have to die, but whoever they are has to die. And so it's part of shamanic traditions to escort somebody into this kind of transcendence where they can be reborn in a sense in a lifetime. They can let go of the part of themselves that needs to die. And in that sense, it's dissolving the concrete of that person that has, this is my narrative, this is my personality, this is my story, these are my coping mechanisms, these are my limiting beliefs, and being able just to shed all that, which is part of what you're doing when you break down the default mode network of the brain. In a sense, the default mode network of the brain is the part of the brain that is saying, this is who I am, when it's just idle. It's just like running this basic, it's daydreaming. It's, this is who I am. This is my story. I remember when this happened. It's reflecting, but it's reflecting from within a structure of what it's chosen to keep conscious. So it's a little block of cement in a sense. So when we can use breath work or psychedelics, various other things, drumming, these things that break down that take us into a trance state or take us into an altered state, then that block of cement again starts to break down, and we start to go into the full consciousness of self and have access to who we are. One of the things that's unconscious is our Inca seed for the most part. It's got our full potential. We're fully loaded so that we can rebirth ourselves in a new, more functional way. We can bring through a new chapter, a new life path, a new version of ourselves that's more functional, and reset the nervous system, all that kind of stuff. So you get a fresh start.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were talking about the cement reliquefying, I was imagining a caterpillar
Yeah.
turning into liquid before it reemerges.
I
Yeah,
like that.
that second lifetime in the same body. Yeah, that's a beautiful gift of shamanic work for sure. Um, yeah. So one of the things we were talking about before we started the interview is your work with psychedelic assisted therapy. And I know that psychedelics are big these days. There's a lot going on in the world of psychedelics, and keeping it sacred is really important. So I'd love to hear about your work in that realm.
Well, I am a big fan of using psychedelics to help people move out of their structure, out of their cement. So people who are traumatized, who've been in freeze, come in, and the first thing I do is I do a 90-minute energy medicine breathwork session with them to see if we can't break down all of that in a 90-minute session. And there are a lot of people can go there, but there are people that are so scared and so locked down and so egoically kind of defined that they're not going outside the box because the box keeps them safe. And so for those people, I recommend that they do some kind of psychedelic therapy. And there's various different psychedelic therapies that you can do. And there's an interesting thing that's going on with psychedelic therapy. I'm going to put that in air quotes, because the medical world is starting to recognize, oh, actually, it's one of the most effective ways of helping people with anxiety, with PTSD, with depression, overcome these things. It's not something that you give somebody like a medication, it's an event or 3 events. It's going and doing the session that takes a day, giving some downtime, maybe do 3 of those, give some downtime, and their brain resets. In the Andean tradition, we would call it a mastai. A mastai is a reorganization. And so what psychedelics do is because they break down the default mode network, they open that person up in real time over a day to explore their unconscious, to start to pull through all the parts of themselves that they have sort of not engaged with, not acknowledged, but are still running all the underground programs. In the psychedelic therapy world, there's no spiritual component to this journey. So it's very much about, we're back to the materialistic world of we're breaking down the default mode network and we're actually, resetting the neural pathways. Okay, that's great. In the spirit, but it's really scary to break down the ego. So, people in trauma aren't excited to do that. So one of the things that's important in that work, in my opinion, is to have this spiritual basis of knowing that there is an Inca seed in you that will survive the breakdown of your ego. There needs to be some kind of thing bigger than ourselves that we can believe in, so that we can surrender this thing that's keeping us safe. And so psychedelic therapy is proving itself to be very effective, but there's also this sense of, it fosters a spiritual kind of connection, because you go beyond yourself. So there's psychedelic therapy, then there's psychedelic ceremony, which is, all the plant medicine based stuff. Therapy can be based on the plant medicine, MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, LSD. These are kind of therapies. And then ceremonies are, all the different plants, the psychedelic plants. That's an interesting world in and of itself also, because plant ceremony is again taking you into that space where you can open up and go beyond your known self, your egoic self, and experience not only who you are at the subconscious and unconscious levels, but also sort of the metaphysical. You can start to see like, oh, like one of the things that I've realized is like space is intelligent. Space is made of fractals and all kinds of things. When you're in that space, you're like, oh, I got it. This whole thing is a living universe. It's not just this is air and that's the wall over there. There's this whole matrix that we're in. It's like we're in an ocean. But that information is talking to us, and we can engage with it, and we learn how to become part of it. So to come back to what do you do with psychedelic therapy, or what do you do with psychedelics? Psychedelics help us, if you can't get there, if it's not safe enough to get there just with breath work, with drumming, with running energy, psychedelics are going to kick the door open. They're a lot stronger than those things. but I will put this caveat in there, or this hesitation in there, or this, this warning in there, that you need to have some kind of thing to anchor into if you're going to blow that all up. So that's where the spiritual traditions, I think, are really important, because they give you a framework to take into it and to take out of it, where you can go, okay, I can let who I am as the person I've created today fall apart. And I can put together, so I can repackage this around the same seed that I had in the beginning. So my ego can break down, but my true self, which is in there, is again going to be be seeding who I am, so I can recreate a new person, or, a person that's more functional. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm a big advocate of using psychedelic therapy in the right context and keeping it sacred, like you were saying. It's there's a few different things where it's losing its sacredness. One is in terms of, when we call it just therapy, you're negating the fact that you're actually opening somebody up to their spiritual self. So, okay, therapy, but I think if you're going to hold that space, you got to have you have to be able to hold that spiritual realm, because people are going to open up to that. And then there's a lot, it's become very trendy, as you and I were talking about before, to do all these ceremonies. And then these become part of the addictive culture of escapism that is part of our, innate in our culture. Like, let's go escape into another ceremony, let's have this great group experience, and then we're going to go home and be assholes again, and not not do the work that's been offered to us. And that's what it's there for. Is it's there for self-reflection, it's there to make a change, it's there for shamanic death, so that you can create a new being, new part of yourself, instead of like, oh great, I had this great experience with a group of people, and we had this moment, and now I'm going to go back into my world and be a jerk.
This conversation has done a beautiful job of speaking to several of the goals of this summit. One, which is finding our own courageous solutions for the problems of today's world. Another is how earth-based wisdom brings us to a state of holistic health and well-being. And finally, the possibility of both personal and global change. So really, I want to thank you for your sharing your wisdom with us today. Before we close, I would really like to have you talk for a minute about your programs. There are two things that I mentioned in your bio, and one is your Superceptor course, and the other is your certification program for people who are interested in pursuing a healing path. So if you could just take a couple minutes to tell us a little bit about those. We're going to have links right under this video to find out about all of these things and the way to contact Christina, but just give us a couple minutes on Superceptor and your certification course.
Okay, superceptors are people that are highly sensitive beings. I found myself, I unburied that I was one of these people, because I had put all kinds of stuff to not feel, because it was way too much information. I had trauma, I had too much sensitivity, so I did all kinds of things to shut that down. And in my journeys and my shamanic growth, I actually was faced with what was called my original sensitivity, and asked if I wanted it back. And I was sort of like, what, like I don't have that? And I was shown, yes, you do not have that. You need to recultivate that. You need to hone that. And so when I let it come back on, I realized it was driven by this incredible anxiety. And that was why I had shut it down. And so what I realized in unearthing my own sensitivity and perceptivity was that, one, as I let it come back on, I realized like how aware I am, and I realized how overwhelming that is. So there's this sense of um of this really heightened bandwidth that what I call a superceptor has, which means they pick up more information, in a given minute than the average bear. The average bear just needs this much information. A superceptor picks up this much information. Now, a superceptor can become a superceptor by, by genetics. You might get that passed through the family line, but in this day and age, a lot of superceptorness is coming through the hypervigilance that comes as a result of trauma. So it's shut down. People don't want to deal with it. I'd rather drink. I'd rather party. I'd rather porn. I'd rather, video game. I'd rather Netflix. I'd rather do anything but have to feel all this. And so because I have gone through the process of claiming that, and then learning how to live with it, and learning how to, to actually to take away a lot of the superstition around it too, because there's a lot of new age superstition about being a sensitive and about the energy world. And the Andean tradition is a very neutral tradition about energy. It's not steeped in fear and superstition and things like that. So it's a beautiful way to get energy sensitives to come face to face with the fact that here's the energy world. Yes, you are super sensitive to it. How do you want to step into being in it in a constructive, empowered way, as opposed to as a victim of it? Because I think that a lot of superceptors go down the victim path. And so this is really about dusting them off, getting them to, go, oh, this is actually a gift, not a curse. And I'm not being, I don't have to worry about all this protection if I can stand in this place of empowerment and I can run my vibration. I don't have to be worrying about, whatever I think is dangerous out there in the energetic world. I can take my, I can claim my power in this world. So I have a weekend course where we address, we start sort of at the base of, what is hypersensitivity, where does this come from? And then the second day is all about energy practices and how do we navigate the energy world and take ownership of it.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
So one of the things quite a lot of people have been talking about lately during the summit is the idea of waking up the sleeping healers.
Mm.
So I'd
Yeah.
love to hear about your certification course.
This is like what I was saying before, is I think, a lot of us get initiated into the path of a healer as a wounded healer. And I think, one of the first things we have to do is shift that paradigm into empowerment. But over the years, I studied with Alberto for years, worked within his paradigm of healing, and then started taking it on my own journey. And started focusing it more on trauma, because that's where I'm more interested in working. He did all kinds of things, and some of it was really ancient shamanic stuff. Some of it was stuff that I would consider superstitious. I stay in this realm, in this world. I'm not concerned about past lives, although they're fascinating, and we can go there if you want. I'm like, what happened in this lifetime that made you, who you are? So we take that hypersensitivity, we hone it, we learn how to track. That would be one of the classes. Then we learn how to hold space, run energy, and hold space for somebody. That would be the second class, to help them just kind of reset themselves. The next level is the next class after that would be kind of soul retrieval stuff. What are the limited beliefs? What are the contracts? What are the things that we've done to diminish ourselves? How to reclaim ourselves? And this is, these are classes that we teach how to do this on somebody else, but by practicing on yourself and on your classmates. And then the last class is ceremony. Like, how do we use ceremony to step into that big space where all of this stuff can kind of be reconfigured? And ceremony can be anything from, literally somebody's dying, to a shamanic death. I mean, it's all about death in a sense. How do you hold this space for somebody to die one way or the other so that they can be reborn, whether it's going to be in this lifetime or another? And those are sort of the four main classes. But it's all kind of, there's a lot, there's also neuroscience to it. There's the trauma response. There's talking about, all those kinds of things, in addition to the spiritual stuff. It requires that you take the Andean Foundation training first, because that's the energy medicine that we're going to use. So you need to have those tools already and that understanding of that cosmovision before you go into the practices.
Fabulous. So, to get registered for that Andean Foundations class, you can look down below this video and find the links to connect with Christina and the Austin Shamanic Center.
Yeah.
So thank you again so much, Christina, for joining us. Um, Also, you have a gift for everyone, and I'd like to just read what that is, and maybe you can tell us a tiny bit about that because we're almost out of time. The free gift is a 2 hour session called Energy Healing for Stressful Times. And during that session, you offer an energetic healing technique. And maybe you could just say a little bit about that.
Yeah, the technique is called Saman Shakwi, and it means showering yourself with Sami. Sami is the energy of creation. Absolutely everything in the three-dimensional world, the physical world, is made of Sami. It's an intelligent living energy. Like I said, it's the fractals in space. It's this whole world is made out of this intelligent living energy. So we're made out of Sami, and humans have the amazing capacity to slow their Sami down by being out of alignment with themselves, to be incongruent with themselves, telling themselves they're this when they're also this, and not being able to be in this sort of I'm this and I accept it and I am doing my best with it. Um, so we slow our Sami down. When we slow our Sami down, our life force becomes slower. It's still Sami. It's a slower version of Sami called Hucha. The Hucha part sort of collects on the outside of our energy field and in our eyes, our perceptive lenses. We have many of those in the Andean tradition. And so this is an exercise that you can do daily. You can do it multiple times a day just to clear the hucha or the slow sami that you've generated during the day by being out of conflict by yourself, by shuffling your feet on against the carpet, essentially, and clearing it so that you can be you can be more congruent with the energy of creation. So think of yourself as being in a bubble, and all the dust, sort of all the gunk sort of collects on the outside of the bubble. You can't that window or that membrane becomes not as transparent to the outside energy, to the light, once that it's sort of gummed up. So if you do this cleanse, you bring yourself back up to the vibration that is the vibration of the light outside you. So you are part of the world again. You're congruent with the energetic universe again, as opposed to stuck in your own little bubble of hell. If it, not necessarily that it's hell, every single day, but we tend to, as humans, go into this isolation of self, of small self, and forget that we're part of this whole huge collective thing. And so the cleansing, the Saman Shakwi, is a way of bringing yourself back into connection and into coherence with the universe.
So for all of you who are listening, make sure to scroll down under this video where you will find the link to your free gift and how to contact Christina. And to thank you again, Christina, for joining us. And I also want to let everyone know that Christina is also a Shaman's Directory ambassador. And she was one of the first to say yes to our One Fire, One Medicine vision. So we thank you for your generosity and your encouragement from the start, Christina.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, my honor. Thank you for inviting me.
So, to everyone who's viewing this interview and participating in the Cosmic Fire Summit, thank you all for being here, for being with us to receive the gift that Christina has shared with us. We hope you have enjoyed this session and that you will join us again for our next interview around the Cosmic Fire.